Welcome to another episode of Meal Prep Monday. I'm your host, Allison Schaaf, and today is part 2 of our caretaker episodes. And if you have not heard the first episode, you can go back last week. I talked about considerations to keep in mind when it comes to, kind of planning for the future of your parents and even yourself. Before I dive in, if you have not tried Prep Dish, that is our time-saving meal prep meal plans. We have super fast meal plans that are 1 hour of prep and you have 5 dinners ready to go for the week. So if you are needing help with your meals, definitely check that out. It's prepdish.com/MPM. That's short for Meal Prep Monday for a 2-week free trial. So this week, I want to continue on the conversation of being a caretaker. So last week actually was more kind of less caretaker. It was more planning, right? Like what conversation could you be having now that might help in the future? Today, I want to talk more like, okay, you find yourself in a situation where you are a caretaker for a relative. I'm going to say parent. That's, to me, seems like the most common situation, but you can become a caretaker for a spouse, for another relative, for a variety of different people, but commonly it is a parent. So, and then again, not going to go into detail, but a situation that I had, over the past 7 months now, where my mom had a pretty bad accident, and after, kind of going through a few different hospital settings, ended up moving in with us for a few months, and is also still in and out of hospital settings as well. And it was just a really steep learning curve in terms of becoming a caretaker. And, I know this podcast focuses on meal plans, meal prep, all of that. I do think there's some crossover when it comes to caretaking. I will say, having a meal plan that you can share with someone who is a caretaker, it really kind of inspired me. And I'm not going down this path right now, but I'm like, gosh, like I feel like there could be meal plans just created specifically for a caretaker. And, Prep Dish could be those plans, right? Like even as is, the plans, could work really good for a caretaker that's needing to prepare meals. But then I think, dietitian hat on, I can see like, meal plans that have things like a soft diet if someone has trouble chewing, or, just different, even more variety of different diets you could cater to in terms of meal plans. Anyway, I digress there. But so say you are in a situation of becoming a caretaker, which for me was unexpected and, happened, well, I guess just unexpectedly, not necessarily overnight, right? Because like there was kind of a lead up time. But once it happens, what are some lessons learned on this podcast? I kind of like to have my list of lessons learned. On this one, there's 5 that I came up with of kind of things that I learned along the way. So one, you can hire caretakers, and in many situations that's because I think sometimes from what I've heard, maybe a child or a spouse will try to take on the role of being a caretaker. I mean, I certainly did for a little while, but depending on the level of care needed, having a hired caretaker, can be really helpful or sometimes necessary. And this could be like a whole, probably even like podcast theme or whatever. You could have several episodes on this, but one of the biggest learnings was like, wow, a caretaker can actually do 24-hour plus shifts. Like they can work days in a row. I didn't even, in the beginning, didn't even know that was a thing because, as an entrepreneur, I've hired people, but, I didn't realize like, oh, wow, caretakers can work these long shifts, and they're more called like a live-in at that point. But that's something that is a possibility if it's needed. Sometimes there is, long-term care policy that can help cover some of that. So there's a whole financial side of it, but just in general, like that, there's that. There are agencies that you can hire through. In my experience, I have had better luck just hiring them directly. That does take kind of some background knowledge, or it's helpful to have background knowledge in terms of like how to hire people, interview people. Background checks are super important. Reference checks are super important. But yes, that's kind of the caretaker thing in a nutshell. Second lesson learned, document everything if you can. And for me, Trello was instrumental in that. And that was from like first week of the accident. Like anytime I'd have conversations with doctors, I would create a new Trello card, a new Trello's app that kind of lists things out. And it's almost like these little sticky notes you can add notes to, you can add links, you can upload files. So that's a place where I would always document conversations I had with doctors. I would put in phone numbers, contact information, just anything goes into that Trello board. It makes it easy, especially if there's siblings. I have sisters and they could log on and see what was in the conversation. We can make a list of questions. We can make to-do lists. We can make checklists. I can put documents in there. So like there's Trello boards that just have everything in them. Like I've documented every part of the process in a few different Trello boards. The third one, prep dish. So the meal plans are helpful, especially if you've hired, well, even if you've hired a caretaker or not, but like having a system and a plan for meals is helpful. So, if this is something, where you're finding yourself needing help, and a meal plan with a grocery list and meals, so we had caretakers that ended up coming and living at our house with us, and prep dish was great because, I plan the meals, I do the groceries, I print out the meal plan. And, some evenings if the caretaker was there and she would, could look at the meal plan and be like, oh, here's what needs to be done for dinner tonight. And she could kind of jump in and help. So I've mentioned this in the past about the meal plans, but that's a nice thing is I'm not having to say, like, I don't even have to go to her and say, here's the meal, here's the recipe. I have a board where I write down which meal we're having which night. So she can just look at that. She can look at the meal plan. She can figure out if there's any chopping that needs to be done, if they're, just figure out what needs to be done for dinner. So it's a great way to kind of communicate about meals without having to do a lot of communication, and it's kind of done for you. The fourth piece is definitely if you are, find yourself in this situation, therapy is so instrumental. Lots of therapy for yourself. A specific one that I really like is called EMDR, and it's a way to kind of process emotions and trauma that might happen throughout the process. So for me, it continues to be a really helpful type of therapy. So that might be one you want to look into. I know I'll try and find it and link in the show notes, but there's a website where you can search for therapists that specialize in EMDR. And then the last one, number 5, is to just, I put treasure, but basically, as this is happening, it can be kind of a chaotic time, but figure out ways to spend time together as a family, take pictures, with my mom living here with the kids, I just tried to have it be a time that was special, for all of us, and to create moments where we could all do things together, figure out activities like singing a song or, just figuring out activities that worked for everyone. So, this, I know I'm kind of being vague, but it really depends on what the situation is. Like if there's a parent living with you, if you're going to visit someone at a hospital, like figure out like, what are your kids into? What can what can your parent do that you can all do together, and have it be a time that, maybe it's a hard time or a time of uncertainty, but maybe it's also a time of like treasuring the moments and figuring out how to curate those so that they are really special. A book that I read, and it's actually not all centered around this, but there was maybe even just a few pages that were really helpful, was How Will You Measure Your Life by Clayton Christensen. I believe he also has some YouTube videos because it was based on a graduation speech he gave. So you could probably look up some of those as well. Although I haven't watched his videos, I do really like the book. But in his book, he talks a little bit about this, about kind of the him putting his life on hold when he had, I believe it was his father going through cancer, and, how important that time was for him. And it was important because he did kind of put his life on hold and go and like kind of care for his dad, and how that, was just a very important time in his life. And anyway, just really kind of get you thinking about how you may want to handle certain situations that come your way. So that was number 5. So those are my kind of 5 takeaways or lessons learned in terms of finding myself in the unexpected situation of being a caretaker. So like I mentioned last week, I would love to hear your feedback, especially on these 2 episodes, because they were a bit off topic. But when I, brought them up on Instagram, it seemed like this was something that a lot of you were interested in. And I know, and unfortunately, a lot of you might find yourself in a situation of being a caretaker. And so I thought I would share some of my lessons learned as I've gone through this situation over the past several months. So hopefully some of you out there resonated. If you have not tried our meal plans, just a reminder that you can head to prepdish.com/MPM. And those are all linked in the show notes as well. That's all I have for this week. I will be back again next Monday with another episode.